The DHX2 may be the most infamous internet shock out there, and Fox Racing, with all their infinite wisdom, decided to sell these without a progressive spring. So if you have any type of linear bike, you need to not ride these, and if you have a progressive bike, you probably need a progressive spring. So hopefully in this video, this backyard trick will basically fix it. After a couple weeks riding the DHX2, I did discover this shock has absolutely no support out of the damper. Locking the high-speed compression out does not prevent it from bottoming out, so I had to put a progressive spring on it. The progressive spring is the only thing holding this thing up in its travel. There's no damping support out of the DHX2. To put this in perspective, I'm 220 pounds with a 600 pound progressive spring and all the adjusters in the middle. If you don't have access to a progressive spring, just slow the rebound down, that does help. So this shock is absolutely phenomenal through the chunk. Where it falls apart and doesn't have the support is during the blue flow trails. And yes, I probably should be on an air shock, but let's see if I can fix this in the garage mahal. This idea was not my personal idea, so this is what happened. I reached out to a whole bunch of shock tuners asking them, what can I do to add some more support into the DHX2? And one of them was not a huge fan of the DHX2 because it's not speed sensitive damping, it's velocity damping, push and pull. So the rebound adjuster right here basically means it's not related to the main piston. So I'm not super technical, just think about me like this baby on your screen. Sometimes I get it right and sometimes I get it wrong. But the Otter's observation here is the best coil shocks I've ever rode always have the rebound adjuster, one single rebound adjuster down on the bottom. And then I was on Pink Bike and I noticed this prototype Fox Float X2, same damper as the DHX2, and it does have like a prototype lever on the bottom. So maybe the new Fox shocks will be more speed sensitive damping. So I did forget to cover this in my last Fox Float X2 drama video. Basically, I think the Fox Float X2 does better than the DHX2. Even though I'm like a diehard coil guy, the DHX2 just doesn't work with the damper in my opinion because of the lack of support. Always get a second opinion, so I reached out to a couple shock tuners, got declined 2 times for tuning the DHX2, even though I did find some new shim stacks inside of the repair manual. But I did speak to one guy and he was like, just try to put some thicker oil in it. It's the easiest thing you can do. And I'm like, yeah. I've already broke my teeth on learning curve how to repair this. So we're going to be putting 10 weight oil inside of the DHX2. It takes 4 weight oil, but hopefully this will just like make it a little bit stiffer so I don't have to use that progressive spring. The DHX2 is extremely easy if you're just popping in new oil. If you do dive into the main piston, it gets a little bit tricky. So remember, you got to start somewhere, just like a baby. With the new oil installed in the DHX2, I put it on the $10,000 dyno, and it has a 29 pounds of force to activate the damper. So I do have a 2022 DHX2. I wonder if they changed something because this one takes about 34 pounds of pressure to get it straight on through the travel. So in next week's video with the RockShox Vivid, we have 65 pounds of pressure to activate the damper. So there's definitely more support out of RockShox, but we'll see how that goes next week with a regular old spring. Realizing there's less support out of the 2024 one, and they were both pumped up to about 110 psi in the same exact shock pump, but it is 40 degrees outside. I decided to put 175 psi in the piggyback to try to get a firmer shock out of the DHX2. So after pumping it to 175, we now have 40 pounds of damper activation force. So hopefully there'll be more support out of this shock. And you should use nitrogen, but the air you breathe is 78% nitrogen. So it's just going to leak out a little bit faster if you don't use proper nitrogen. There's no real difference when it comes to like that regular old trail riding in the DHX2 with thicker oil and a massive gas charge inside of the piggyback. So I gotta go do a big compression to see if it feels more supportive. After a couple purposely hucked the flat, there was definitely more support coming out of the DHX2 with that massive gas charge. But I just realized You just change two things. Once again, you need to change one thing at a time. Try the gas charge and then try the oil, because recharging the piggyback to 176 psi would have been a lot easier than bleeding the entire fort. I did discover a few good and bad things when it comes to running thicker oil or more gas inside of the piggyback. So number one, it's definitely not as small bump sensitivity, and I'm not going to take this on some huge downhill excursion because my time is super limited. The small bump sensitivity department was definitely better than an air shock, but it definitely was suffering a little bit. But remember that coil spring does isolate you regardless of how the damper is doing. A couple runs down the test track, I did discover this thing had some increased pop out of it. I was actually really impressed by how it felt after basically doing all those modifications. So remember, this is outside of the repair manual, so do this at your own risk, but I think it's a pretty awesome upgrade.